Welcome to the Archetypal Man podcast. On this episode, Apollo and Aries talk stories. What are stories? Why are stories? Why do we care so much about our stories? And finally, how and why are the stories being changed in this modern era, and do they even matter? I was amazed as I'm trying to contemplate stories how deep this subject is.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It seemed on the surface like a simple thing. Sometimes it would overwhelm me when I would sit to write the notes. I'm looking at stories as a technology, which might sound strange, but I think it's a very important technology, maybe one of our most important technologies that humans have ever developed. From this perspective, stories pass on information that codes into our memories easily or somewhat effectively. There's certain stories you can hear once or a few times and you can remember it forever. Something like The Boy Who Cried Wolf, you can hear that story once and never forget it.
Yeah, go figure. Yeah, absolutely.
Why do stories have the particular format they do? What is it about that format that makes a story? And why are they so emotionally involving? What does that have to do with technology? My thoughts are, technology is the use of materials and concepts external to the human body to accomplish human tasks. Math and reading are technology, and the stories probably are one of our oldest. They almost certainly predate formal math. They definitely predate formal writing, because writing was developed to keep track of taxes and sheep and goats and grain harvests, and there was apparently some controversy when people started writing down stories as opposed to just telling them around the campfire.
Right.
From this perspective, stories are a filtering technology. They filter out irrelevant information and pass on relevant information.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So what happens when we're reading a book or watching a movie or TV show and they give us information that is unrelated to the plot? We get bored or angry.
Right. Or introduce you to a character that you just can't identify with. No matter how hard you try, the character is so
Right.
unbelievable in some way, like inhuman it's amazing. We have to identify with the struggles, or we get that feeling. It literally feel like we get kicked out of the story. Like if we're watching the movie, all of a sudden, like you were in it, you
Right.
were in it, you were in it. Then something happens, or somebody comes on screen, and or the story takes a turn where it focuses on this person that you have nothing in common with, and then you just feel like you've been evicted from the story, and you can't get back in.
Right. So that's really interesting. So you're kind of implying that there is an altered state that we get in, I guess, a story state, if you will.
Story state, yeah,
That,
I like that.
right? I like that too. Well, it's an altered state, right? You listen to music you like, you're in the groove. The groove, it's an altered state of being entrained. It's called entrainment when you essentially vibrate or resonate with a thing.
Oh, right, yeah.
You could get entrained in a particular story, and it's like an altered state. It's a story state. Why do people get so emotional when they get kicked out of the suspension of disbelief? What's the emotions? What's the anger? What's the boredom? What's all that about? I think it's because stories are a really important technology or human function that is so critical to our life. Before there was writing and computers and ways to store all this massive amounts of information outside our minds, we had to remember everything we needed.
Right.
Like there's no writing. And so I think in a way symbolism formed as a shorthand for that. The cave paintings or certain symbols formed, but then everything else that needed to be explained out had to be passed on in stories. Because are you going to remember, well, you go left at the oak tree and then 14 paces past that is a creek that you go across. Yeah, I mean, you can remember it. But if you tell a story to like a young boy, right? This other young boy, he goes across the creek and gets almost gets eaten by piranhas, and then he goes past the tree and squirrels throw nuts at him, but then he eats the nuts because he's starving. You get emotional reactions to that, and you start remembering it.
Right.
Very easily. And there's actually a relatively simple nervous system explanation for this. The limbic system is involved with both transfer of memories from short-term memory to long-term memory, and it's involved with emotional coding.
Wow. Yeah.
So psychology tends to view those as two separate functions, but I think they're the same function. That's the gateway to the story state, is that limbic system, or potentially, there's no clinical studies on the story state as far as I know, but that's a potential entrance to the story state is you get that emotional involvement and identification with characters. All good stories have that.
Right.
I think we get emotionally involved because they're necessary, and we get upset if somebody's bad at telling stories or making bad movies because, ain't no hunter-gatherer have time for irrelevant information.
Yeah. I like that. No, it's absolutely right. And that kind of makes me wonder about the mental state or the thinking behind the telling of the stories. Because, it makes me think of when
Right.
I was in school and I was studying like early humans, Native American tribes, that kind of thing. And I'd hear about, read about the passing of stories, orally, the passing of histories from generation to generation, told by the elders down to the younger generation. And that's the way it was. That's the way the
Right.
record keeping was, technically. Past a certain point, as certain stories were being told, it makes me wonder if they were aware of the societal function that was being carried out in the telling of those stories.
Mm.
I am a studier of stories, aka I watch a lot of movies. I've read a lot of books, and I like entertainment.
Right.
So I've done a lot of that stuff, and always keep track of how a story appeals to me, and then I'll actually kind of introspect. I'm like, why do I like this story and not that story, kind of a thing. And I would notice that I would take on a story in my mind, and I'd want to become like the character. I'd want to have something that the main character would have. In essence, I think stories kind of did this thing where they would challenge us to challenge ourselves, because almost all of the stories have some kind of hero or the protagonist or whatever, and they would embody, one or more of the chief virtues.
Right.
So I think it's kind of safe to say that maybe these storytellers were empowering the individuals of the society, either knowingly or maybe just they were kind of in the groove themselves as a storyteller, and they were challenging everybody in their tribe to have these virtues, because a virtuous tribe obviously is going to be a good society, and it's going to last a long, long time.
It has the potential to, but we know pretty clearly that an immoral society with little to no virtue will not last.
Absolutely. And there are plenty stories about those. What do they call those? Cautionary tales?
Cautionary tales, right. Well, one of the common ways to view any story or dream, for that matter, is to take all the characters and all the settings and assume that it is actually all part of your internal landscape or your internal psyche. So the villain would represent your shadow side, or all these antisocial, anti-civilizational urges and forces we all have. And the hero or the protagonist would represent your noble side, your noble qualities, or your virtues.
Right.
How many eons did it take for humans to figure that one out? Probably a long time. Because one of my questions, did we evolve to remember stories, or did we develop stories because we had systems that readily entrained two stories?
Ah, right.
I think it's an important question, but one that really probably can never be answered fully, because it's that one of those chicken and egg situations.
Right.
But the identification with the hero, or identification with any of the characters, it's essentially The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, right?
Right.
That we talked about.
Right.
Many times.
Many times.
Yeah. Briefly, he was a comparative mythologist, and so he studied myths from all around the world, as far back in history, essentially, as he could go. And he developed a theory that, in fact, all these myths were telling essentially the same story, which he called the monomyth. George Lucas, of course, famously followed the monomyth, or the hero's journey format, to the letter to make the original Star Wars Episode 4. And boy, it struck a real chord with people, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly did with us.
Right. Speaking of chords, it's like just hearing any of John Williams' music from that, and I'm instantly transported to that story state of Star Wars.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Well, in terms of story, I think George Lucas was hitting on the story of the modern man, and that's why it resonated with people. And the story of the modern man is an uninvolved father and a boy who has no rites of passage and no way to become a hero.
Yeah.
That's the story of Luke Skywalker. And even when he does find his father, turns out he's the second most evil person in the entire galaxy. Tough break, kid,
Yeah, them's the breaks, huh? Yeah, your father's a dark lord of the Sith. Better luck next time.
Yeah, how George Lucas in the 70s, when he was writing this, managed to distill the myth of the modern man in the information age into a movie like that. I think that's why it speaks to people. What's the typical journey of a modern man? If you've got a father, he's probably emasculated.
Yep.
So go to school, get a job, pay your taxes, get married to a woman that tries really hard to control you. And no rites of passage into manhood, nothing.
Yeah. End of story. Man's modern story is end of story. Yeah, I mean, that's about it. I mean,
there you go. Yeah. Yeah, the modern man's story is no hero's journey, which means no story.
Yeah.
So I think that's why Star Wars resonates. So when we talk about identifying with a character, I think there's a lot of pretty deep stuff going on in our nervous systems and our psyches. I think it's activating the limbic system and our emotions, and it's even activating perhaps the seeking reflex, which is a rather complicated reflex that gets us moving towards a goal. And then if something gets us off of that goal, we have to figure out whether we go to this other interesting thing or get back to the specific goal we were seeking. So the seeking reflex is really complicated, but really important. It's like that's the thing that kind of gets you out of bed and gets you moving through the day. And so I think that's what's happening when you're in the story state of a particular juicy story, and maybe the writer isn't very good, and an extraneous character or a plot point comes in. Your seeking circuit's trying to figure out why am I interested in this? Let's go back to the other thing.
Yeah, it's like a light bulb. It's like, why am I interested in this? Oh wait, I'm not. I'm just like,
Right.
right. Yeah, I totally get that. And it's amazing how, like me, you may not have gone to college to study it, if you're just a person that watches movies, but it's amazing how when that kind of a thing happens, and even if it's just a technical error on the storyteller's side, you pick it up right away.
True.
And it has an emotional effect on the viewer. It has an effect. You'll get pissed off, you'll get sad, I mean, it just is like, oh man, you're literally disappointed. And it's just a movie. It's just a story.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah. Right. I mean,
Because so many of like the modern reboots have been, well, I was just about to say bitterly disappointing. Why would I be bitterly disappointed about a movie?
exactly.
What's the big deal? I can feel emotions when I think of what's been done to like the Terminator franchise.
Oh God. Oh,
Well, you name it, basically. Ghostbusters, Star Wars, of course. I'm bitterly disappointed. Like something materially significant has happened to me, but it's just images and sounds. Why do I care so much?
right. Right. It's just a movie, right? I mean,
I think it's not just a movie. I think that's the point.
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, one of the things I've been hearing from social commentators and pop culture commentators is the belief that movies are like the modern religions, in some ways the replacement for Christianity, and perhaps from this perspective, it's a replacement for the Christian story.
Wow. Now I could totally see that. The way you see zealots from every franchise coming around, and they just
Right? The Harry Potter zealots.
right, Harry Potter zealots, Trekkies, Star Wars. I mean,
The Force, you can become a Jedi and essentially worship the Force as an official
no
religion.
way. Really?
Yeah, it's accepted as a world religion.
Oh, I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably super lame from what I've seen to actually try to practice that, since lightsabers aren't real. I'm not sure how you could be a Jedi without lightsabers. But it's reached that level of cultural significance. I don't know. I remember probably 15 years ago hearing an author. He wrote a book, and I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, unfortunately. But he wrote a book called "Our Gods Wear Spandex,"
Oh.
and he was talking about this way before anybody else is now. They're like early days of YouTube, or even before, I think, when he wrote the book, that comic book heroes have become our new gods.
Wow.
That's pretty significant because Zack Snyder's take on the Man of Steel on Superman addressed that head on. I would be shocked if he hasn't read that book I just mentioned, Our Gods Wear Spandex, because so much of the imagery in that was straight up Superman as Jesus, right?
Absolutely.
Before he goes back to fight that final battle, he eclipses the sun with his body in the shape of a cross. like, why don't you just shove it down my throat,
Subtle.
man? Yeah, very subtle. Like, oh, I almost missed that one.
Well, it's actually really interesting, really quick about that. Before Zack Snyder was actually selected to head up the DC cinematic universe, Christopher Nolan was actually tasked with going to talk to him and get they had him in mind, and he thought, oh, okay. Turns out Zack Snyder is a huge follower of Joseph Campbell and his hero's journey.
I would be shocked if it wasn't. Yeah.
And he had Superman's story just completely laid out. He had, I guess, drafts, charts, and an easel, laser pointer, and everything. He had it all laid out of how the DCEU, every movie was going to be essentially impacting Superman's hero's journey in some way.
Right.
I thought
Wow.
that was really cool. I would have loved to have seen that come to fruition in its entirety, because Superman's timeless. He always has been, even in the days of Christopher Reeve.
Right.
Superman was he was the truth, justice, and the American way. He was the man in red and blue, and that was the image. And Zack Snyder dared to, much to the chagrin of some, he actually dared to bring a very human journey to the Man of Steel. And I think that's why I found it so compelling. I think that's why you found it so compelling. And then that's also why it triggered a lot of people, because it was messing with their concept of God.
I wanted to talk about this, so this is good. The first time I watched Man of Steel, I mean, I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it particularly. And then
Really?
watching it several years later, after going through my rite of passage into manhood and really going through essentially an existential moral crisis in my life, or maybe a couple of them, it really spoke to me, that movie did.
Wow. Yeah, no, I can totally see it.
And the fact that so many people hated it, it really made me think, why didn't I identify with it, or why wasn't I into its story state? And I keep trying to come to some other conclusion. I want to give you better news, but I think it's because people don't have the requisite morality to understand what Zack Snyder was trying to say.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I think the exact same thing. I think his work, his vision was something that very literally people aren't ready for on a deep moral level. I think they just spiritual level even. I don't think people were ready for it, and that's why he got so much hate, I think.
Right. So you know more about it than I do, because you in particular followed DC, I think, a little more. What happened to the sequel? What happened to the plan and the whole projected DCEU? It got completely sidetracked. I don't even think sidetracked. I think it got derailed on purpose. That's my opinion from the little bit I've studied. Maybe you could speak to that, especially in light of stories. Why didn't this story get told?
Derailed is the best. Derailed is I mean, somebody stuck 1,000 pennies on that track. I mean,
Yeah.
just
And a little bit of dynamite, just to be sure.
yeah,
I think.
just to be a little bit of dynamite on top, and then C4 and maybe a couple of nuclear warheads. I don't know, but yeah, whatever happened, it just seemed like every mistake you could make in a technical sense in the setting up of the DCEU has been made and is being continued to be made even now. Because
But some of these weren't even mistakes.
No.
Like, he got pulled from Justice League. What happened to the Man of Steel sequel? It made enough money.
Oh man, yeah.
Generally speaking, even if it didn't get the best reception, critically, movies that make that much money and already have that much behind it, just get at least one sequel to try.
Right. Yeah, the studio began interfering immediately right after the release of Man of Steel. Warner Brothers got involved, and Zack Snyder had this whole slow burn series that revolved. Even if it wasn't a direct Superman movie, all of the DCEU in which the other characters of the Justice League were going to be introduced, it was all going to have an effect on Superman. Superman was going to be present even if he wasn't the main protagonist of that movie, and it was going to have an effect on his journey and the events of all those movies, culminating into one big crisis for Superman, essentially becoming a man, a human man, with superpowers.
The Christian story in the Bible is like the story of Jesus is essentially the conflict or the paradox of Christ being both the Son of Man and the Son of God.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Both human and a God. I mean, that's Superman. That's the story, right?
Absolutely.
So what is it in our society that does not want to hear this story?
I don't know.
I have some ideas.
Yeah, please.
So let's compare that to the Star Wars sequels, right? The trilogy by J.J. Abrams, wherein Rey was the main protagonist.
Right.
Do I even need to tell you?
No.
But I will anyway, right? What was her hero's journey?
Negative, Captain. There was none. Well, I mean, I guess
she started as the hero.
Yeah, she started as a hero, and I guess her overarching theme over all three movies she was in was that she had everything she needed.
Right. She started as God. There was no hero's journey to get to godhood.
Right. Yeah, there wasn't even a struggle with the godhood itself. It all just came so naturally, and the only struggle was other people struggling to keep up with her.
Right, right. And so actually in the comics, Superman ran into this problem.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Because, yeah, the 70s and 80s in particular, he became so powerful that how do you set up conflict for a man that can bench press the earth?
Yeah.
Really, in the comics, he could. And like he could do so much stuff, like who could defeat him? They actually started running into problems telling a story that anybody cared about, because anything Superman wanted to do, he could essentially do, because writers kept adding power, this kind of power or this other power. And so Zack Snyder, I think, understood this at a deep level, that the problem inherent in Superman is that he's so powerful that he comes to Earth as God. Well, so if you come to Earth as God, what's the story model here? It's Jesus Christ, right? Like that's the story model. At least in the West, there's other traditions too, but in the West, that's the story model. So it's the struggle of a man who knows he is God,
Right, but also is faced with being in the world but not of it.
The point is he struggled with it. Ray didn't struggle with it. There was no struggle to attain godhood, because I guess in terms of story and getting thrown out of the story state for a particular universe, let's say the Star Wars universe, the lore or the canon there is Jedi have to learn to train their powers.
Right.
They have to train with their powers to become able to use them. Rey got to bypass all that. She's the only character we know of that just had insta force powers and couldn't bypass it. So what is that saying at a story level? What do you think?
Well, in a way, it's actually just kind of killing the hero's journey. You know,
I agree.
the message. I mean, are you saying what's the message that comes through with that kind of?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. What is the message that comes through?
Oh man.
Is it relevant for us humans? I don't think so. That's where I keep coming to this idea that it's the morality of the writers and or the people watching. There's no useful morality for a human to the story of Rey.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yep.
But the story that Zack Snyder wanted to tell with Superman had a lot of useful morality, useful information, relevant information to the human condition. Elon Musk is trying to make brain chip implants.
Oh man.
We're literally coming to the cusp of godhood here, maybe just through straight up technology and all the science fiction stuff that we heard about as children, uploading our consciousness to computers. They're working on that. And not in a joking way. Will it happen in 10 years? Or maybe 100, maybe 1,000? Even if it happens in 1,000 years, are we going to be ready for that?
Whew, man, that's a loaded question.
Right? One that I couldn't even attempt to answer. But our stories need to get in gear if we're going to handle stuff like this.
Right.
And I think there is pushback for the Zack Snyder's Superman because, I don't know, maybe even some anti-Christian sentiment. The Christian symbology was so obvious there. I'm going to sound like the old curmudgeon here, but whatever. I'm just going to go into it. Where is our morality headed in this culture of identity politics, LGBTQ special treatment, feminism, outright hatred of men?
Hatred of men, hatred of tradition.
Right, hatred of tradition.
Open rebellion against tradition, it seems. I mean, just in your face, all-out war.
Right. I mean, in some ways, the United States is reaping what was sown at the beginning of being quite rebellious against tradition and against monarchy, probably for some legitimate reasons, but also where's the United States gone in just under 300 years now?
Right.
All tradition is bad, rebel against everything. Rebellion has become a virtue, right? Just being rebellious, just going against the grain, like, tear down the authority. That's a virtue now.
I know.
That's dangerous. That's dangerous territory because that now is. Tell me a story in the United States that doesn't at least have some of that. Even Star Wars, which I love, is still telling the story of taking down established authority in a way.
I know, taking down the established authority. I mean, there was a lot of, obviously, you've touched on it with George Lucas being able to channel and appropriately tell that story, at the beginning of the information age in the 1970s. Just in the
Right.
verbiage that he used in the story, was the battle between the old republic, right? The old ways, the tradition, and then you've got the Galactic Empire, which in essence was technologically advanced. You have a man, Darth Vader, who is literally blended with the machines and is half man, half machine.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, he pretty much was.
Well, I'm sort of saying the opposite. When Episode 4 happened, A New Hope, the Empire was the established order.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
For good, bad, and otherwise. Like, it was essentially a monarchy. It's kind of telling the American story just from the information age of a boy with no rites of passage and no way into manhood. And I don't have a great answer because I think the United States was addressing some legitimate problems and issues with the current authority. The answer is to work this stuff out with stories and then go live it, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially inherent with the words of Benjamin Franklin when he told the reporter, "I've given you a republic if you can keep it." Now
Which we
didn't
didn't.
about that. That in itself is a story, right, and a challenge. Okay, this is what I've given you, and he challenged, like, if you can keep it. That's not really what people did. They kind of relaxed. It takes the highest morality to disrupt or destroy the established order, right?
Right.
In fact,
Right. And do it in a just
exactly.
way.
Moreover, to the obvious point, you have to have a plan afterwards. You have to have a plan.
Right.
How many of these people have you seen, in what you're talking about, all these acts of just smash the patriarchy, smash the established order, but they got no plan. What are they going to do? It's like defund the police. But if something bad happens, they still call the police. So it's like, that's what happens when it's rebel without a clue, rebel without a plan. You have to have a plan.
Right.
And these people don't. It's the highest morality. It just shows how these people aren't even open to leading a rebellion. These people aren't even ready for Black Friday sales. I mean,
Damn.
I mean, seriously. But yeah, I think it highlights, in what you're saying, is how many years has this messing of the stories been going on? Our stories have been messed with. And then also you can see very clear signs of degrading morality in our society, for sure. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that worldwide, this is a thing that's happening.
Right. Right. So we haven't really compared notes on this. So we're sort of thinking and responding to each other's ideas. So there's like the story state, there's the function of stories that passes on relevant information, and then maybe there's a specific moral function that we're talking about here.
I'm convinced of
Stories.
that. I think that there is a very glaringly obvious moral function that the storyteller was channeling, either knowing or...
Can you have human morality without stories?
Ooh. I'm a huge story guy. I'm going to say no.
I'm going to say no as well. I don't know that I have a great explanation for that other than a feeling, but how do you pass on morality without a story?
You pass on morality by reinforcing reality. And that's kind of what I think that stories do when they were passed on in that ancient level. They reinforced reality.
Okay, I like that.
They told people what's real, the struggles. Yeah, the struggle is real. It's like the meme, but prepared
Right.
children for struggle and for hardship so that at the first sign of trouble, they didn't go running home to mama or hiding under the bedclothes, I think there's a strong connection between morality and reality that was inherent in the stories that were told, especially at the early level, where it was important to keep people grounded in reality, even if it was fantastical. That was, I think, when you make reality more fantastic, when it's grounded yet it's
Right.
believable, the great bull of heaven, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, that kind of a thing, Greek mythology, it becomes more powerful, more potent. We're able to say and to see that it's fantastical.
Yeah, you say fantastical. So stories have a level of abstraction, right? So abstraction being a lower resolution so you can get another concept across, or a higher concept, right? So based on my understanding and research and study and contemplation, the modern human thinks differently about a lot of things. We tend to view the world now through a rather scientific lens. In other words, science is the highest authority, and science is about essentially physical reality. We even call it reality, right?
Right.
And what we mean by reality is mechanical forces, like matter, right? In the word matter is like, it's the thing that matters, is our atoms.
Oh, right. Yeah, makes sense.
The traditional people before the scientific mindset, it's really tough to say, but if you look at the stories we do have passed down, it's not that they didn't work at the physical reality, because obviously they did, but they were also able to work at another level of reality that we would call the fantastical or the symbolic or the religious, that I think to them was just as real. In a story like Gilgamesh, when you talk about the bull of heaven attacking, they had a sense of what the bull of heaven really represented symbolically, and I think it was very real to them. The bull of heaven was this is my interpretation based on other people's, the forces of nature that try to throw you off of your daily life or building civilizations. You get a typhoon that comes in, that wrecks the town. That's the bull of heaven.
Yeah.
It was very real, and from that perspective, it was very accurate.
Yeah.
We today think of that as inaccurate or stupid. These people were not stupid. Okay, they could survive stuff that would probably kill the average man. Do you think you and I would last a week 5,000 years ago?
I mean, I would like to think that I could, but my realist side says no, probably not.
15,000 years ago, if I just get transported into a hunter-gatherer tribe, I don't think my chances are real good. I'm in decent shape, but holy crap, there's almost no way. So they evolved technologies, and I think storytelling and stories were a part of the technology they used to survive, to develop morality, to pass it on, to connect with their families, their tribes, their children, and to see the world from this symbolic point of view that actually worked for them. So there's abstraction, right? That's like taking things to a higher level. You leave out some details so that you can take things to a higher level. You're abstracting out of a situation the relevant information. So to develop a story, one of the possibilities is, like, say, Gilgamesh was actually an amalgamation of many powerful kings or warlords or tribal leaders whose exploits got somewhat exaggerated and then kind of coalesced into one great king. And he wasn't perfect. Like he would have his way with any wives he wanted that weren't necessarily his own wives.
Oh, okay. So he
Catch my drift.
Drift caught.
And that actually causes him problems. It's a fairly realistic story in that sense. So there's this abstraction, which is useful, and humans have to do it. That abstraction power is a power we have. But it works against kind of the scientific mind, even though people abstract and scientists abstract all the time. Like, science is trying to get out of story. That's kind of the point of science, is to not have any value, not have any meaning to the raw facts, the raw conclusions it's trying to come to about the nature of reality.
Oh, right.
Does reality actually work that way? Like, we don't know. And we're sort of running into that problem in science. I say we, I'm not a scientist, but science seems to be running into that problem. It's like the express purpose of science is look at the world and find the physics that runs the universe, which I suppose is why science is led by the universities. Right?
Oh, yeah, right.
See, even then, there's like story behind all this. So the scientific method is designed to remove narrative and therefore meaning. It's highly useful for many things, but my question to you is can we communicate meaningful things outside of story?
Ooh. Yeah, no, I just don't think so.
So I think of the two big tenets currently of science, physics in particular, or physics and biology in particular, is what? Evolution and the Big Bang.
Yeah.
Physics, which has to be removed from the very concept of narratives, values, and meanings, we've turned it into a story. Ask a physicist to explain the universe and how it formed. What are they going to tell you?
The Big Bang Theory. Or the theory of evolution. Yeah.
The story of the Big Bang. And the Big Bang, they made it a TV show.
Oh, right.
All about scientific nerds.
That's right. I hadn't thought of that.
The Big Bang is the physics version of the book of Genesis.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It even tells the Adam and Eve story in that TV show.
No way. I never watched it, so
It's about two physicists, and then one of them falls in love with the cute girl across the hallway, and they completely play out the Adam and Eve story. And then eventually the other autistic physicist even gets his own Adam and Eve story too.
Oh, wow.
They'll tell you, well, the Big Bang started, or the universe started with the Big Bang and the heat escape, but they'll tell it in somewhat like a narrative form, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't even get it. And to me, this is the big one. Evolution. When anyone speaks of evolution, it's automatically personified. It gets turned into a story. Tell me about how animals evolve without personifying evolution. I dare you.
Yeah, you'll be waiting a while.
Yeah, evolution selected for. Evolution is a thing that selects? That sounds like humans or gods or God.
For evolution so loved the world that...
Like, it sounds like a creator, right? Yeah, exactly. Humans, I do not think humans can get around having their creator be a person.
Huh. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of huge, actually.
That's insanely huge. And what do we want to hear from our parents? How many times did our mothers tell us the story of our birth?
More than a few, right?
A ton. And did you ever get bored hearing it? I didn't.
No, neither did I.
You're right. I was constantly searching that story for more details about my origin. What is biology, especially evolutionary biology? It's the desperate search through the story of our origins so we can figure out something, anything about ourselves and what we're supposed to be in the world and the universe.
Right. Maybe there's part of us, even as children, we're looking for that ray of bright light or the thundering voice or the seven halos or the seven rainbows that form over our head when we're born, some kind of indication of meaning to our coming, to our coming about. Even at that young age, we're kind of seeking that. Maybe that's why it's so compelling. It's a beginning to a story, somewhere it's perceived.
Yeah, because the good stories, right? There's a meaning. There's value to it. Like for me, the Star Wars trilogy with Rey as the protagonist, it just meant nothing. I left without getting any meaning from it, and it made me angry. I was upset.
The biggest thing I could describe after leaving the theater after each and every one of those movies is emptiness. I felt unfulfilled, like going to a restaurant, expecting something to eat, and instead you get a bill, and you get sent along. It was just kind of emptiness. It felt like wow, I should have liked this movie. There were explosions and starships and good special effects, and I should have liked it. And why didn't I? Well, that was the question that launched everything. I mean, that was part of the things that set my foot on the archetypal journey.
It really was, wasn't it?
It was. That was the last straw. Star Wars was, my family was, they were just Star Wars nuts, and Star Wars was the story of my childhood. We had all the movies on VHS. I'm going to sound old. We wore them out watching them, and that was just, we lived and breathed Star Wars. And when the sequel trilogy came about, which was the first time we had seen a continuation to our childhood story, the prequels were a continuation of sorts, but they were still prequels. But when we actually got to see the story continued, it was so disappointing. And it left me so empty. And I racked my brain trying to figure out why.
Right.
But we found out.
And yeah, in a way, that's like what caused us to start the podcast.
Yeah, that was the catalyst.
It really was. That's when I started thinking of archetypal forces inside us. And not that I came up with the concept, obviously, but it became real to me when Star Wars got fucked with.
Right.
That's when it became real to me. When my story, one of the most important stories of my life, and I know that sounds ridiculous for a grown man to say, Star Wars is one of the most important stories in his life, but I'm just going to claim that. It really is to me. And when that got messed with, it activated anger in me and emotional responses and a somewhat desperate attempt to understand the forces at play here.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think the biggest one for me was after watching The Last Jedi when Luke Skywalker was just grossly abused. And Luke Skywalker was my childhood hero. And after that, I remember that night I put my boys to bed and I sat in a dark room and cried for a good hour. And even while I was crying, I had no idea why I was doing it. But I was crying about Luke Skywalker. And I'm like, why the hell am I crying about Luke Skywalker? I knew that we were Star Wars nuts, but damn, this is deep. And
right.
It puzzled me. It confounded me. And that's why I started talking to you even more about it, trying to delve deep into it, like peeling back the layers and be like, why is this going on? And that's when
we spent hours.
Breaking it down, writing our thoughts down and then comparing those writings. And I mean, it was crazy.
I wish I could have cried. I was angry. I saw The Last Jedi. I came home. I was grumpy with my son. I spent a weekend in a funk.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Finally, a couple days later, I'm like, wait, this is from that movie. Why and how did I have such an emotional reaction to a movie?
Right.
One of the foundational stories of Western civilization in the information age anyway. Maybe foundational's stretching a bit, but I don't know about that. I think for these generations, they're approaching the importance of the Christian story, at least personally, right? I mean, like the Christian story and the other earlier stories have built the civilization, the foundation we're on, but in terms of people personally relating to a narrative, it's one of the most important stories.
Absolutely, it is. And it's like them going back to Greek mythology and saying, hey, Hercules was a ninny. I mean, how good would that go over?
Apollo was an idiot who was bad at music, and Athena was frankly a dumbass, and she was kind of ugly. You can't mess with the stories like that without at least some results, or some effects, I should say. Thanks for listening to part 1 of our episode on stories. At the very end, I said some results when I meant some effects. I think I had a little Freudian slip there when I said the word results, because it does indeed seem there are forces trying to change our stories, and perhaps even change our deep mythology, all for reasons that are somewhat unclear and perhaps quite sinister. In part 2, we explore what the results and effects of these changes have been on both individuals and society at large. We hope you tune in